It's a thought that creeps in late at night, or maybe when you're walking through a deep, quiet forest. The feeling that we're not totally alone, not in a UFO kind of way, but in an older, more earthy way. Could another kind of human, a cousin species we thought was long gone, have held on? Could a small group have survived, hidden away from us until recently? It sounds like a campfire story. It's the root of myths like Bigfoot and the Yeti. But the science is more surprising than you might think. For most of our history, we were not the only humans on this planet. Not by a long shot. The world was a lot more like Middle Earth than we imagine, with different types of people sharing the landscape. We, Homo sapiens, are the last ones left, the lonely survivors of a big branching family tree. The question isn't whether other humans existed. They did. We have the bones to prove it. The real question is about timing. The official story says the last of our relatives, the Neanderthals, died out around 40,000 years ago. But what if that date is wrong? What if a pocket of them, or some other group, found a refuge and lasted for thousands of years longer? What if they survived so long that our great-great-great-grandparents might have actually seen one? To even begin to answer that, we have to go back and meet the family. Who were these other humans? First, you have the most famous ones, the Neanderthals. They weren't the grunting cavemen of old cartoons. They were sophisticated, they lived in Europe and Asia, they made complex tools, controlled fire, buried their dead, and maybe even had some form of art and language. They were shorter and stockier than us, built for the cold of the Ice Age. For a very long time, they were the dominant human species in their part of the world. And we met them. We know this for a fact. We didn't just fight them or avoid them. We had children with them. Most people today with ancestry outside of Africa have a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in their genes. They are a part of us, but then, after we Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they faded away. The standard timeline says that by 40,000 years ago, they were gone. Then you have the Denisovans. These are the mystery people. We know about them almost entirely from DNA pulled from a few tiny bone fragments and teeth found in a cave in Siberia. But that DNA tells an incredible story. They were a distinct group, a sister species to the Neanderthals. And they were widespread. Their genetic legacy is found in people across Asia, especially Melanesia and places like Papua New Guinea. This means they must have lived all over the continent, from the freezing mountains of Siberia and Tibet down to the warm islands of Southeast Asia. We know even less about what they look like or how they lived than we do about Neanderthals. They are a ghost species, known to us mostly through the echo they left in our own DNA. They also interbred with our ancestors, and when did they disappear? We have no real idea. The cave where their bones were found was used by them up until about 50,000 years ago. After that, the trail goes cold, but maybe the most incredible character in this story is Homo floresiensis, better known as the Hobbit. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, scientists found skeletons of a tiny human species. They were only about 3.5 feet tall. They had small brains, but they made stone tools, hunted, and dealt with predators like giant storks and pygmy elephants. They weren't just small Homo sapiens, they were a completely different branch of the human family, likely descended from a much more ancient ancestor, Homo erectus, who got stranded on the island and shrank over generations. This is a process called insular dwarfism, and it happens to other animals. Here's the part that really shook things up. The first dating of the Hobbit fossils suggested they lived until as recently as 12,000 years ago. That's not ancient history. That's yesterday in evolutionary terms. It means they were definitely around when our own species was building the first towns. It was a mind-blowing idea, a completely different kind of human living alongside us, almost into the modern era. Later, more rigorous dating pushed that timeline back. The current consensus is that the hobbits probably disappeared around 50,000 years ago, around the same time Homo sapiens first arrived on the island of Flores. It seems we have a habit of showing up right when other human species disappear. But for a while, the scientific possibility of a 12,000-year-old hobbit was on the table. It showed us that we shouldn't be so certain about our timelines. So we have at least 3 other types of humans who were definitely around 50,000 years ago. The Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, and the hobbits on an island in Indonesia. The world was a busy place, and then it wasn't. It was just us. Or was it? This is where the evidence ends and the speculation begins. This is where we look for shadows in the forest. Let's build a case for a late survival. The argument rests on three main pillars: unexplored places, persistent legends, and the simple fact that we're always discovering new things. First, the world is a big place. We think we have it all mapped and explored, but we don't. Not really. Think of the vast boreal forests of Siberia and northern Canada, the Congo Basin, the deep valleys of the Himalayas, the mountainous, jungle-covered interiors of massive islands like Borneo or New Guinea. These are places where a small, elusive population of animals could easily hide from us. We are still finding new species of monkeys and other large mammals. If a primate can hide, why not a hominin? A hominin is just a smart, upright primate. If a small group of, say, Denisovans was pushed into the most remote parts of the Altai Mountains or the Himalayas, it's not impossible to think they could have survived. They would have to be very good at avoiding us. But maybe that's the skill they learned over thousands of years of us pushing them out of the best territory. Maybe survival for them meant becoming masters of stealth. A small family group living off the land, moving with the seasons, leaving almost no trace. It's a romantic idea, but it's not physically impossible. They wouldn't be building cities. They would be living as hunter-gatherers, a lifestyle that leaves a very light footprint on the earth. This brings us to the second pillar: folklore. Every culture seems to have a wild man story. In Europe, it was the wild man of the woods, a hairy, club-wielding figure living outside of civilization. In the Caucasus Mountains, there are stories of the Almas. In the Himalayas, it's the famous Yeti. In North America, it's Bigfoot or Sasquatch. On the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, it's the orang pendek, a short, hairy, upright ape-like creature. And on the island of Flores, where the Hobbit fossils were found, the local people have stories of the Ebu Gogo. The Ebu Gogo legends are particularly chilling. The stories describe small, hairy, human-like creatures who walked upright, had their own language, and would sometimes steal food from the villages. The legends say the last of them were tricked and killed by the local Homo sapiens ancestors just a few hundred years ago. When scientists first found the Hobbit fossils, they were stunned to hear these local stories, which seemed to describe the very creatures they were digging up. Could these stories be folk memory? Could the Yeti be a distorted cultural memory of Denisovans who adapted to the high altitudes of the Himalayas? We know that modern Tibetans have a special gene that helps them live at high altitudes, and they got that gene from interbreeding with Denisovans. The connection is already there in our blood. Could the orang pendek of Sumatra be a surviving population of Homo erectus, or a relative of the Hobbit from Flores? It's easy to dismiss these stories as just myths, and most of them probably are. Humans are great at telling stories. We see monsters in the shadows, but the consistency is strange. So many different cultures, separated by oceans and continents, all describing a similar creature, a human-like, non-human being that lives in the wildest places. Is it just a coincidence, a common archetype of the human imagination, or is it a shared, ancient memory of a time when we weren't the only people on the block? A memory of our cousins passed down through thousands of generations, becoming more and more distorted until it became a story about a monster. The final pillar for the they survived argument is the humility of science. We keep getting surprised. The Hobbit was a complete shock. The Denisovans were a complete shock. Before we found that little finger bone in Siberia, we had no idea they even existed. What else are we missing? Fossilization is an incredibly rare event. An animal has to die in the right place, be buried in the right way, and have its bones mineralized over millions of years. Then, millions of years later, those rocks have to be exposed, and someone has to be lucky enough to find the fossil. The number of individuals who ever lived versus the number of fossils we have is ridiculously small. So the absence of bones from, say, 10,000 years ago doesn't mean a species was extinct. It just means we haven't found the bones yet. It's an argument from ignorance, which isn't strong, but it's true. We are working with a very incomplete puzzle. We can't say with 100% certainty that every single Neanderthal was gone by 40,000 years ago. But it's possible a tiny, isolated clan held on in a remote valley in the Urals or an undiscovered cave system in Spain for another 5,000 or even 10,000 years. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. The world was a lot wilder back then. So, you can build a plausible story. A story of a relict population hiding in a remote corner of the world, their existence bleeding into the folklore of the modern humans who live on the edges of their territory. It's a compelling tale. But then you have to face the other side of the argument. The reality check. And the case against recent survival is very, very strong. It rests on genetics, ecology, and a simple, brutal nature of us. The biggest weapon against the idea is modern genetics. Our ability to read DNA, both from ancient bones and from modern people, is incredibly powerful. As we mentioned, we know we interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. That genetic history is written into our cells. If a population of Neanderthals had survived in Europe until, say, the year 1 AD, and continued to have occasional contact with Homo sapiens, we would see evidence of that. We would find a specific, recent injection of Neanderthal DNA in the genomes of people from that region. We don't. The Neanderthal DNA we all carry seems to be from encounters that happened a very long time ago, around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, when our ancestors were first leaving Africa. The same goes for the Denisovans. The high percentage of Denisovan DNA in Melanesians seems to come from an ancient mixing event, not from continuous contact. If a group of Denisovans were still living in the Himalayas, we would expect to find a much stronger and more recent genetic signal in the people living there today. While Tibetans have that one useful gene, they don't seem to have evidence of recent interbreeding. The genetic trail goes cold tens of thousands of years ago. Then there's the ecological footprint. A population of animals needs to be a certain size to be viable. You can't just have one or two. You need a breeding population, probably at least a few hundred individuals, to avoid inbreeding and have a chance at long-term survival. A few hundred large primates leave a mark. Even if they don't build houses, they need to eat. They hunt, they gather, they leave behind tools, butchered animal bones, campsites with charcoal from their fires. We are very good at finding these things. Archaeologists have found millions of stone tools from our ancestors and our cousins. We can trace the spread of Homo sapiens across the globe by the trail of artifacts they left behind. So where is the trail for a recent Neanderthal or Denisovan population? Where are the 10,000-year-old Neanderthal-style spear points? Where are the 5,000-year-old Hobbit campsites? We don't find them. The archaeological record for all other human species seems to stop, everywhere, around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago. After that, all the new tools, all the cave art, all the artifacts, they all belong to us. It's like they just vanished from the stage of history, leaving only one actor. And this leads to the hardest, most uncomfortable reason why other humans probably didn't survive. Us, Homo sapiens are an incredibly successful and incredibly invasive species. Look at what happened every time we entered a new continent. In Australia, the megafauna, the giant kangaroos and wombats disappeared. In North and South America, the mammoths, mastodons, and saber-toothed cats vanished. There's a strong debate about whether we were solely responsible, but our arrival sure seems to coincide with a lot of extinctions. We were smart, adaptable, we worked in large groups, and we had sophisticated technology that was always improving. Neanderthals used the same style of tools for over 100,000 years. We were constantly innovating. When we moved into a territory occupied by another human species, we were probably not friendly neighbors. We were competitors. We competed for the same food, the same caves, the same water sources. And we were better at it. Our populations grew faster, we were more organized. Maybe we were just more violent. It's unlikely we systematically hunted them down in a war of extinction. It was probably more subtle, a slow, grinding process over thousands of years. We took the best hunting grounds, we pushed them into more marginal lands where it was harder to survive. Our diseases might have devastated them, and we also absorbed some of them into our populations through interbreeding. Over time, their populations just dwindled and collapsed. It's a pattern we see over and over. Wherever Homo sapiens go, biodiversity tends to take a hit. It's hard to believe our own human cousins would have been an exception. For them to survive, they would have had to find a place so remote, so undesirable, that we never bothered to go there. And those places are very, very few. Finally, there's the problem with modern sightings. The evidence for Bigfoot or Yeti is, to be blunt, terrible. It's always a blurry photo, a footprint that could have been faked, an ambiguous sound in the night. In an age where almost everyone has a high-definition camera in their pocket, we have less convincing evidence than we did 50 years ago. There has never been a body. There has never been a piece of undeniable DNA evidence, like a clump of hair. There has never been an undisputed artifact. All the supposed Bigfoot hair samples that have been genetically tested have turned out to be from bears, or dogs, or other known animals. The cryptozoological evidence just doesn't hold up to scrutiny, so where does that leave us? On one hand, you have the romance of possibility, rooted in the genuine scientific fact that we were not alone for a very long time. On the other hand, you have the cold, hard data from genetics and archaeology that says the story ended long ago. But maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe the question isn't a simple yes or no. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, did they survive until today? Maybe we should be asking, how recently did the last ones really die out? The 40,000 year ago date for the Neanderthals is an estimate. It's the date of the last known fossil we found. What if the last group didn't die out 40,000 years ago, but 30,000 or 25,000? That's still a huge jump. It would mean that our direct ancestors in Europe lived with Neanderthals not just for a brief moment, but for 15,000 years. That's 3 times longer than all of recorded human history. It changes the story. It gives so much more time for interactions, for stories, for memories to be formed. Consider the hobbits on Flores. The revised date for their disappearance is about 50,000 years ago, right when modern humans arrived. But what if one small group managed to hide in the thickest, most inaccessible part of the island's jungle? What if they survived for another 20,000 or 30,000 years? That would bring them to 20,000 years ago. And a memory of that could certainly be passed down through generations to become the Ebu Gogo legends. It doesn't mean the Ebu Gogo were still there 400 years ago. It means the story of them was. This is perhaps the most elegant and likely solution. The wild man myths are not stories of creatures that are still out there. They are the echoes of real encounters passed down through an immense stretch of time. A cultural fossil, a memory of our lost cousins, warped by thousands of years of retelling, but with a grain of truth at its core. The memory of a time when our world was more diverse, more magical, and maybe a little more frightening. The stories persist because the memory of not being alone is baked deep into our collective psyche. The survival of a lost human species into the modern era is almost certainly a fantasy. The scientific evidence against it is just too overwhelming. A viable population could not have hidden from our genetic sequencing, our satellite imagery, and our relentless expansion into every corner of the globe. But the idea doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a real, scientifically proven past. We did share this planet. That part is true. And the end of that sharing might be more recent than the current fossil record shows. The final Neanderthal may have taken her last breath under a sky that was also being watched by people who were, for all intents and purposes, just like us. The last Hobbit might have heard the sounds of modern human children playing near the river. That is the powerful truth behind the myth. We are the last ones. Our species is now the only human game in town. And maybe the reason we keep telling stories about Bigfoot and Yeti is because we feel a deep subconscious loneliness. We miss our family, we walk through the deep quiet woods and wonder if it was always this empty. And we imagine a world where the answer is no.